My grandfather built that house with his own hands. That's not a metaphor. He actually did. Poured the foundation himself in 1974, framed the walls over 2 summers, wired the electricity with help from his brother because they couldn't afford a contractor. He used to take me out to the backyard when I was little and point to a section of the fence and say, "I built that the week before your mom was born." He was proud of it in a quiet way, the way men of his generation were proud of things, not loudly, not constantly, just reliably. Every time I visited. He passed away 14 months ago, pancreatic cancer. Fast the way that one always is. In February, he was fine. By June, he was gone. I'm 29 years old. I work as a hospital administrator in Indianapolis. I'm not rich. I'm not struggling. I'm somewhere in the comfortable middle that doesn't get much sympathy from anyone. I mention this only because my brother will later try to frame everything as me being greedy. I want you to know who I was before any of this started. My grandfather's name was Harold. His house was a 3-bedroom craftsman in Dayton, Ohio. Nothing fancy. A decent neighborhood, a big backyard, the kind of place that's worth maybe $280,000 in today's market. He left it to me in his will. Not to my mother, not to my brother. To me, specifically by name, with a letter attached that my grandfather's attorney read aloud at the estate meeting. The letter said, "Sable has always reminded me of your grandmother. She visits, she calls, she remembered my birthday without being reminded. This house should go to someone who will love it. I trust her to do that." My mother started crying before the attorney finished reading, but not the grief kind of crying. The other kind. My brother's name is Donovan. He's 34, lives 40 minutes from Dayton, and has been managing our grandfather's finances as a co-signer on his checking account for the past 3 years. That detail matters. Hold on to it. Donovan and I were never close. We're 5 years apart and we want completely different things from life. He married young, has 2 kids, coaches Little League, drives a pickup. I don't say any of that as a criticism. I genuinely don't. But he and I have always orbited each other at a polite distance, the kind of relationship where you hug at Christmas and don't call in between. After Grandpa Harold's estate meeting, that polite distance collapsed overnight. He texted me the same evening. Not a call, a text. "You know that house should stay in the immediate family. Mom agrees. We think you should sign it over to me, and I'll make sure you get compensated fairly." I stared at that message for a long time. Compensated fairly. Like I had stumbled into something that belonged to him, and he was being generous enough to offer me a finder's fee. I wrote back, "Grandpa left it to me. I'm going to keep it." He didn't respond that night. My mother called me instead. My mother is the kind of woman who has an opinion about everything and frames every opinion as concern. She was worried about me taking on a property. She was worried about the upkeep. She was worried I didn't understand what I was getting into. She said Grandpa Harold had loved us all equally, and she was sure he hadn't meant to cause division in the family. She said, and I remember this exactly, "Donovan needs a place to expand. He's got a family, Sable. What do you need a house in Dayton for? You live in Indianapolis." I told her that Grandpa Harold had made his wishes very clear, and I intended to honor them. She said she hoped I would think about what really mattered. I told her I was. We hung up, and I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was completely calm. Sometimes when you've spent your whole life being told your instincts are wrong, you develop a very quiet certainty about the moments when you're right. I was right about this. I knew it the way I knew my own name. The estate was in probate for about 2 months, which is normal. Donovan was the executor, which my grandfather had arranged because Donovan lived nearby, and it seemed practical at the time. The attorney, a man named Mr. Geddes who wore bow ties and had the energy of someone who had seen every version of this situation before, walked us through the process. The house would transfer to my name once probate closed. The personal property inside would be distributed according to a separate list Grandpa Harold had left. His checking account, which had a balance of around $31,000 at the time of death, would go to my mother as the named beneficiary. Straightforward. Sad, but straightforward. Probate closed on a Thursday in October. Mr. Geddes called to let me know the deed transfer was processing and I would have documentation within the week. I thanked him and booked a rental car for that weekend. I wanted to go see the house, walk through it, start thinking about what I'd do with it. I drove up on a Saturday morning. It was one of those October days in Ohio, where the sky is that specific shade of gray that feels like a wool blanket. I had a coffee from the gas station and the radio on low, and I was actually looking forward to it, in a tender, bittersweet kind of way. I was going to go sit in my grandfather's house and remember him. I turned onto his street and saw Donovan's truck in the driveway. I sat in my car for a moment. Then I pulled in behind him. The front door was unlocked. I walked in and my sister-in-law, I'll call her Renee, though that's not her name, was in the kitchen unpacking boxes. Not small boxes, large ones, a stand mixer, a coffee maker still in its packaging, a set of dishes. She looked up when I came in and did not look surprised to see me, which meant she had been told I might show up. "Hey," she said, like we'd run into each other at a grocery store. "What's going on?" I said. "Oh, we're just getting settled," she said. "Donovan's upstairs." Getting settled. I walked upstairs. Donovan was in the master bedroom, my grandfather's bedroom, with a measuring tape measuring the wall where the dresser had been. The dresser was gone. The room had already been partially cleared out. "Where is Grandpa's furniture?" I said. He turned around. He didn't look guilty. That's the part that still gets me. He just looked like a man who had been mildly inconvenienced. "We put some of it in storage," he said. "Some of it we donated. It was old, Sable. That wasn't your decision to make. Someone had to start clearing the place out. You live 4 hours away, Donovan." I kept my voice level. I had learned, somewhere in my 20s, that the most effective thing you can do in a moment like this is not raise your voice. "This house is mine. The deed is transferring to my name right now. You need to leave." He put the measuring tape in his pocket. "Mom thinks we should talk about this more as a family. Mom doesn't have any legal standing in this situation." "You're being dramatic." "I'm being accurate." I took out my phone. "I'm calling Mr. Geddes right now." I did call Mr. Geddes. He was patient and clear, the way he always was. He told me the transfer was processing and would be official by Tuesday of the following week. But that as the named beneficiary of the estate, I had full legal claim to the property as of the close of probate. He said, if there was an unauthorized occupancy situation, I should document everything and, if necessary, contact local law enforcement. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring and immediately went on the offensive, which told me she already knew exactly what was happening. She said Donovan needed more space for his family. She said the house was just sitting there. She said it would fall into disrepair if I didn't have someone living in it. She said, "I want to make sure I get this right. You don't need a house, Sable. You have an apartment. You have a career. Donovan has a whole family to think about." I said. "Grandpa left it to me," she said. Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly at the end. That was the sentence that changed everything. Not because it made me angry, though it did, but because I realized that she was willing to go there. She was willing to say her father-in-law hadn't been in his right mind if it meant getting what she wanted. And if she was willing to say that to me privately, she might be willing to say it in other contexts. I told her the conversation was over and I hung up. I went back downstairs. My sister-in-law was still unpacking the coffee maker. "I need you both to leave," I said. "Today." She looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between pity and annoyance. "Donovan said you'd be like this." "Like what? Difficult." I looked at her for a moment. Then I took out my phone again and dialed the non-emergency line for the Dayton police. The officer who came was a woman in her 40s who had clearly handled this kind of situation before. She was professional and efficient. She asked for documentation. I showed her the paperwork Mr. Geddes had sent me, and she had a quiet conversation with Donovan in the hallway that I wasn't part of but could partially hear through the wall. His voice was elevated. Hers was not. They left within the hour. Donovan didn't say anything to me on his way out. His wife gave me one long, cold look over her shoulder. I stood in my grandfather's living room, which now had boxes stacked against one wall and smelled like someone else's cleaning products. And I felt the specific exhaustion of being the person who had done nothing wrong, but still had to fight for it. I changed the locks that afternoon. I'd had the foresight to bring a lock set with me, which I'd bought at a Home Depot near my apartment the night before, because some quiet part of me had suspected something like this might happen. I don't know if that's sad or just smart. Probably both. I drove back to Indianapolis that night and spent the following week doing two things: working my regular job and going through every piece of documentation I had related to the estate. This is when I found the first thing. Mr. Geddes had sent me a full accounting of the estate assets as part of the probate process. I had read it quickly the first time because there was a lot of it, and most of it was what I expected. But I read it again that week, slowly, and I noticed something that hadn't registered before. My grandfather's checking account, the one with $31,000 that was supposed to go to my mother as named beneficiary, showed a current balance of $31,000. But there were 12 months of statements attached, and the account had held closer to $68,000 12 months ago. I went through the withdrawals line by line, over the course of 14 months, starting around the time my grandfather's diagnosis was confirmed. There had been a series of cash withdrawals and transfers. Some were small, some were not. In the 6 months leading up to my grandfather's death, the withdrawals accelerated. $2,000 here, $3,500 there. One transfer in March of $12,000 to an account I didn't recognize. Donovan had been the sole cosigner, the only person with access. I sat at my kitchen table with the statements spread out in front of me, and I did the math 3 times because I didn't trust myself. Approximately $37,000 was unaccounted for. I called Mr. Geddes the next morning. He was quiet for a long time after I walked him through what I had found. Then he said, "Sable, I want to be careful about what I say here, but I think you may need to consult with a probate litigation attorney." He gave me 2 names. I called the first one that afternoon. Her name was Miss Okafor. She practiced estate litigation and elder financial abuse cases out of Columbus. She had a voice that was warm on the phone and exact in a way that I immediately found reassuring. I sent her the statements that evening. She called me back the next morning. "This is a pattern I've seen before," she said. "The escalating withdrawals near end of life, the large transfer to an external account. I want to do some more digging, but I think you have grounds to pursue this." What does that mean practically? It means we file a petition with the probate court to compel a full financial accounting of the estate during the period of cosigner access. If what we find in that accounting is what these statements suggest, we're looking at a claim for breach of fiduciary duty and potentially elder financial exploitation under Ohio statute. I asked her what elder financial exploitation carried in Ohio. She told me it was a felony. I did not tell my mother or Donovan what I had found. This was Miss Okafor's advice, and I followed it. The weeks between that phone call and the court date were some of the stranger weeks of my life. I went to work. I answered my mother's occasional texts with one-word responses. I let Donovan's silence sit undisturbed. I acted like someone who had accepted the situation. I had not accepted the situation. What I had done was given Miss Okafor time to pull together a comprehensive picture. The petition was filed. The probate court ordered a full financial accounting, and that accounting, when it came in, was worse than I had expected. The total withdrawn from my grandfather's accounts during the 14 months of Donovan's cosigner access, checking, a small money market account I hadn't even known existed, and a CD that had been cashed out early, was $53,400. Not $37,000, $53,400. The $12,000 March transfer had gone to a joint account belonging to Donovan and my sister-in-law. That one was easy to trace. The other withdrawals were in cash, which was harder. But Miss Okafor told me that in cases of elder financial exploitation, the burden wasn't on us to prove where every dollar went. It was on Donovan to account for it, and "I took my grandfather grocery shopping" doesn't explain $53,000 in cash over 14 months from a man who rarely left the house in his final year. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in January. I drove to Dayton the night before and stayed at a Holiday Inn near the courthouse. I ate a sandwich from the vending machine and watched television I didn't absorb and went to bed early. I had told my mother there was a court date. I had not told her what it was about. She assumed it was about the house. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the particular smell of old documents and industrial cleaner that seems to be universal to government buildings. The judge was a woman. Late 50s, I guessed, with reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on, and an expression that suggested she had developed a genuine allergy to wasted time. Her name, according to the placard, was Judge Wentworth. Donovan was there with an attorney, a man in a gray suit who looked competent but not brilliant. My mother was in the gallery, which I hadn't expected. She was wearing her good coat and she looked, for the first time since I could remember, genuinely uncertain. Miss Okafor presented first. She laid out the timeline. The diagnosis, the cosigner arrangement, the pattern of withdrawals, the CD liquidation, the March transfer. She was methodical and calm, and she didn't editorialize. She didn't need to. The numbers did it for her. Donovan's attorney argued that the withdrawals were for legitimate caregiving expenses. Groceries, home maintenance, medical equipment not covered by insurance. He had receipts for some of it. For some, but not all. Judge Wentworth took off her glasses and set them on her desk. "Counsel," she said, addressing Donovan's attorney, "your client has documentation for approximately $9,000 of $53,400 in withdrawals. Is that correct?" A pause. "That is correct, Your Honor. We believe additional records may be located. The burden to produce those records was established when this court ordered the financial accounting in November," Judge Wentworth said. "We are now in January. I am not inclined to continue this hearing pending records that have had 2 months to materialize." She turned to Donovan directly then, not to his attorney. To him. "Mr. Novak," she said, "your grandfather trusted you with access to his finances during a period of profound vulnerability. The documentation before this court suggests that trust was not honored. I want to give you an opportunity to speak to that directly before I make any determinations about referral." Donovan looked at his attorney. His attorney gave him a very small nod. Donovan said, "And I will remember this for the rest of my life. I was doing my best." Judge Wentworth looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said quietly, "is not a response to what I asked you." She looked back at her papers for a moment, then she looked at Donovan again. "Is there anything you would like to say before I refer this matter to the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office for review under Ohio's Elder Financial Exploitation Statutes?" The silence in that room was complete. Donovan's attorney leaned over and said something very quietly into his ear. Donovan sat back. His face had gone through several different things in the past 3 minutes, and it had landed on something that I recognized. The specific expression of a person who finally understands the size of what they have done. He didn't say anything else. Judge Wentworth did not issue a final ruling that day. What she did issue was an order compelling Donovan to repay the estate the full $53,400, with 30 days to establish a payment plan with the court. She also ordered the matter referred to the prosecutor's office, which did not mean charges were guaranteed, but meant that someone with subpoena power and a badge would now be asking the same questions Ms. Okafor had been asking. She also briefly but clearly confirmed my ownership of the property. The decedent's intent regarding the real property was unambiguous, she said. "I see no grounds for any challenge to the transfer." My mother left the gallery before the hearing concluded. I don't know exactly when she slipped out. I noticed her absence when I looked up after Judge Wentworth's final remarks, and the bench where she had been sitting was empty. Miss Okafor touched my arm as we gathered our papers. "That went well?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "It's a strange thing to feel when you've just won." It wasn't triumphant. It was more like the feeling after a very long car trip, the relief of arriving somewhere, the faint memory of having needed to go there in the first place. That was 3 months ago. Donovan has retained a different attorney and is in the process of negotiating the repayment. The prosecutor's office has been in contact with Miss Okafor's office. I don't know what that will lead to, and I have stopped speculating. What happens from here is between Donovan and the legal system, and I have genuinely tried to remove myself from having feelings about it either way. He is my brother, and I loved my grandfather, and I am holding both of those things at the same time without resolution, because that is what this kind of grief actually looks like. My mother called me about 2 weeks after the hearing. It was a short call. She said she hoped I was satisfied. I said I hoped she understood that none of it had been about satisfaction. She said she didn't know how we came back from this as a family. I said I didn't know either, but that it would have to start with honesty about what had actually happened. She hasn't called since. I expect she will, eventually. My mother always circles back. The house is mine. I drove up to Dayton last month, on a Saturday, this time without dread, and I walked through every room. Someone, Donovan or my sister-in-law, before any of this, had painted the kitchen a color my grandfather never would have chosen, a sort of muted sage green that looks like a home decor catalog rather than a person's home. I'm going to repaint it. I know what color Grandpa Harold would have wanted because I asked him once, years ago, just making conversation. And he said he always liked the blue his mother had used in her house when he was a boy. I'm going to make it that. Whatever blue feels right. I sat in his kitchen for a while that afternoon, in the chair where he always sat, facing the window that looks out onto the backyard he built himself over 50 years ago. The maple tree he planted in 1989 is enormous now. He told me once he'd planted it the year my mother was born, one of the only sentimental gestures I ever saw from him that he didn't immediately undercut with a practical explanation. I thought about the letter he left. She has always reminded me of your grandmother. She visits, she calls. She remembered my birthday without being reminded. I used to feel slightly embarrassed by that, the way you feel when someone says something kind about you in public and you don't know where to look. But sitting in his kitchen in January light, I just felt grateful. He knew. He knew exactly what he was doing. He built that house with his own hands and he left it to someone he trusted to love it. I'm going to make sure he was right.